We're now at the part of our program where we're have our morning feature speaker. Soil health gaining new life through cover crops. We're very lucky to have Dan Towery with us. Dan operates ag conservation solutions in Lafayette, Indiana, which focuses on no-till, cover crops, nutrient management, and soil health through the U.S. Midwest. Current clients projects include the Indiana Conservation Cropping Systems Initiative, the Oregon Ryegrass Growers Seed Commission, and the Conservation Technology Information Center. Dan has authored several publications on a systems approach, which also addresses an economic perspective and the farmer's profitability. Dan, prior to operating Ag Conservation Solutions, was employed by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS, for 25 years. The last 10 years of this period, he was assigned to the Conservation Technology Information Center in Lafayette, Indiana, a national nonprofit.
They don't want to hear that.
I'm not done yet, but anyway, Dan comes very highly qualified, and we're very lucky to have Dan. I had breakfast with Dan this morning, and he's a real resource information. So let's all join in welcoming Dan to her.
Nope. Okay. We got a little technical issue here, perhaps.
It's on the side of the table here, I think.
This one?
No, on the table.
Okay. That's dangerous. You have two remotes that look exactly alike, but one works one machine and one another. It is a pleasure to be here. For one, you have better weather here today than I do at home. 25 centimeters of snow with 30-mile-an-hour winds. So I'll wait till probably the 4 o'clock, and I'll call back and ask the wife if she's got the lane cleared out. So anyway, I had breakfast here with a dairy farmer. How many dairy farmers do we have? Oh, quite a few. Okay. What is the difference between a dairy farmer and a crop farmer?
7 days a week.
Pardon?
7 days a week.
7 days a week? Yeah. Another way to look at it is a dairy farmer loves his cows, but a crop farmer doesn't love his crops. He loves his tractors. Okay, so soil health, I'm going to explain that a little bit. I was able to be here last night, and obviously there's a lot of interest in cover crops, as there is back in the States, especially in the Midwest. 5 years ago, there were very few cover crops, other than if it was an organic farm or they had real erosion problems. So we're taking a whole new look at cover crops. And I don't know if we've got any tillage jockeys in here, but research is going on right now to see if gene therapy, if we can actually change your DNA, because that's the only way they're going to get off that tractor. My tagline for my company is blending ag profitability while enhancing the environment. We've got to find those win-win type of situations. Okay, I'm from, actually it's Lafayette. Actually West Lafayette, which happens to be where Purdue University is located. How many think that their soils are healthy? Okay, could they be better? Okay, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about this is a journey. It's not, we do this one thing and boom, we're there. It's a journey. Every year is different, the weather is different, crops may be different, and it's how can we make this a win-win situation? Now, obviously this is not a picture from Ontario, but I bet if I looked hard enough, I could find one. We have come to accept that runoff from our crop fields is going to happen. And it doesn't have to. And in fact, one of the big issues is we need to dry the field out. So we need to hit it with the field cultivator. Well, it does dry out the top few inches, but then it also causes very poor soil structure. Some years that may not matter. Compaction deeper down. If we have good soil moisture, the roots will go through it, but if it turns dry, then it's a problem. So we can use the soil as a filter instead of running off like in this picture. Because again, tillage can correct a problem or it can cause the problem. And many times it's a treadmill. So we're trying to use the soil to its greatest potential. That's the big difference between soil quality. Soil quality is, what's the percentage of sand, silt, and clay, the texture of the soil? Is it flat or rolling? Soil health is we're going to change some of the characteristics. That can be a win-win. So, I'm not a real smart person. So I've hung around innovators and other very talented people. And this is actually one of the ideas or the concepts. Instead of working the soil, let the soil work for you. Let the soil work for you. Part of it is our terminology that we use. Part of the issue is a lot of farmers look at their cropland as being dirt. Well, we're going to elevate that. In fact, I do a little bit of work with the Howard Buffett Foundation, and we have a hat here. And let me know if I need to explain it to anybody. It's called Got Dirt, Get Soil. Because the soil is a living organism. I'll be more comfortable here. Big to do in the States, I assume it's somewhat here, that we're going to need to double our yields. Well, we're going to have all kinds of technology. Genetics. We didn't get corn planted. I think the average date was, it was like May 25th this year. And in Indiana, we had record crop, 177 bushels the average. It was all the weather. And that's one of the things that I want to elaborate on as we go through. Nothing is black and white. Everything needs to be put in context. And we'll go through several examples of putting it into context. So, building a more resilient soil. A soil that can better handle if it turns dry in the summer, can better handle if we have intense rainstorms. So, common high yield denominators, we've got our traditional agronomic aspects, but we can change the root zone depth. We can maximize the biological activity. We're going to increase the moisture holding capacity. It doesn't happen over time, but we can show how with the residue, the changes in the soil, increasing organic matter, we can gain, it depends on the soil texture, whatever, but probably 3 to 5 inches of additional soil moisture. And we saw that in the last 2 years. 2012 with our drought, it wasn't uncommon. The guys that had been using covers, that's how, if you've been around cover crops for a long time, you call them covers. So it's kind of the shorthand. But we had a few instances of, and again, apologize, 100 bushels per acre. But I'm sure you're used to guys from the States and can translate that pretty well. That wasn't the norm, but we had many, many, many cases of a 40 bushel yield increase on corn, 10 to 12 bushel increase in beans. Last year we turned dry in August. Beans suffered a little bit, but again, we still had a 5 to 7 bushel increase where the guys had been using covers, and on the corn, a 10 to 20 bushel increase. So that's one of the reasons why this thing has, the use of covers is climbing so fast. But I keep telling folks, you know, don't expect this every year. Every year is different. You got to go back to in any one year, what's the lowest common denominator. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. Microbes. Who's got microbes? Yeah. Okay. Well, show me your microbes. You can't, they're invisible, but yet they're everywhere. And we wouldn't be here on this planet if it wasn't for the microbes. They're in your body, and they can weigh as much or more than your brain. Now, some people have a little smaller brain than others, perhaps. Not pointing fingers. But they outnumber your own cells 10 to 1. All right, we got microbes. So what? Well, let's just look at the microbes in our gut. They help digest our food. They help absorb nutrients. They protect the intestinal walls, help regulate weight, wards off autoimmune diseases. And most of them are either beneficial or, and I've got some acquaintances that I call these the unobtrusive freeloaders. Okay, there are some harmful ones, but it's things like when you take an antibiotic, you're disrupting those microbes, the bacteria in your gut, and sometimes you have a side effect. Usually it's called diarrhea, but it's what happens. You know, and again, I know Guelph is a great university here. We've got a lot of good ones in the States. Purdue ranks up there. And they've done a pretty good job on the physical and chemical side. But we have totally forgotten the biological component. And it is huge. I want to say I am not a microbiologist. I probably should have stayed last night instead of staying here. I probably should have gone to the Holiday Inn Express, because that's what I try to do before I get too technical here. Okay, we got four basics to improve soil health. Minimal soil disturbance. The top 2 inches are the most important. Keep the soil covered. Have a living root in the soil as much as possible. And try to have as diverse crop rotation and or cover crops. All that we're doing is basically trying to mimic Mother Nature, the natural system. You can't go too far wrong when you do that. But you got to do it and pay the bills. So this is kind of our other slogan: keep something growing every day possible for better soils and higher yields. You know, cover crops aren't new. And my understanding here that, you know, there is a fairly good percentage of corn, soybeans, wheat, and the red clover catch crop, pretty popular. Because down our way, got some wheat, but it's primarily rotation of corn beans, corn beans, or continuous corn. Okay, not very diverse. So these are not your grandfather's cover crops, even though a lot of them are, but the way we're handling them now is entirely different. One, and this is, we constantly have to harp on our growers. They slow down to 50 miles per hour driving by and evaluate their cover crop stand. I'm sure it's different here in Ontario, right? Oh yeah, it'd be, you drive at, what, how many kilometers is that? We have to get out and dig to see what's happening. You have to do it. Now you can do it the hard way with a shovel, or the easy way with a backhoe. But you need to do that. Actually, I was in a field right before Thanksgiving, and we had cover crops got planted late. It's a cool fall, so we didn't get the growth that we normally do. Annual ryegrass, it was up about 2 inches. But we dug the pits, and we had roots down, and this was before Thanksgiving, going down 24 inches. So it's doing its work. So you can't evaluate just what's on top. This was kind of our aha moment. I was working with Dan DeSutter, farms about 25 miles south of Lafayette. He'd been doing continuous no-till for, well, his dad was doing ridge-till. He went to no-till and then continuous no-till for 20 years, and then started introducing cover crops. So this is, again, annual ryegrass. It was drilled on October 1st, which is a tad on the late side for us. But in April, early April, we had 9 inches of top growth, and we had roots down 51 inches. Now granted, there's fewer roots, obviously, as you go deeper down, but those roots were down there working. Just a little soil biology 101. It's, we got bacteria that decompose herbicides, break down residues, store and cycle nitrogen, nematodes, protozoa, fungi, microarthropods, earthworms, they're there. But what we've done is the soil microbes are a little bit like our organic matter. They're only going to go so low, and it's only going to go so high. But if we can have more and more diversity, there's all kinds of benefits. And these are numbers that don't mean anything at all, or they don't to me at least, a handful of soil. There's lots of those microbes out there in the soil that we don't appreciate. So what happens with tillage? And again, I'm generalizing here big time. So if we've got any microbiologists in the crowd, okay, that's good. We're going to have a little more bacteria because they're going to break down the residue, which is good. But they're not very beneficial into improving the soil aggregation. And this can result in a sealed soil surface and increased runoff. Our growers in the States have, a lot of them, all they know is corn and soybeans. They never had any experience with cover crops. Their closest was back in the days when we had set-aside acres, government acres, and they would go out and throw a half a bushel of oats, and they got their cover on there. So it breaks down the residue, and that's good, but it doesn't do much for soil structure. When we stop doing the tillage, we'll have an increase in the mycorrhizae. And this mycorrhizae act as extension of the plant roots. That improves the nutrient uptake and moisture uptake. These are the hyphae right here between soil particles. But this population, it takes time for it to increase. Doesn't happen overnight. And if we do tillage, we just knock the population back down. It's kind of like a spider web out there, very fine. And the fungi produce glomalin. Well, that's like a super glue. That's what holds the soil particles together, but with improved pore space. Improved pore space is critical. We need oxygen to get down to the roots. It allows the water to infiltrate. You need to appreciate your mycorrhizae. Very simple concept of what cover crops do. They leak, I'm just going to use sugars as the catch-all. They leak this sugars to the mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae puts out the hyphae. They bring in nutrients and water. You've just made your plant much more efficient. Oh, this is just, again, electron or a microscope. Basically, they've calculated that a root by itself will explore 1% of the soil volume. If you have a healthy soil, robust mycorrhizae fungi, that can increase to 20%. 20%. Your factory just, its efficiency just increased dramatically. But it's a dynamic system and it changes over time. This is kind of to help explain, and again, I'm just observation. I was here last night, I saw some of the reports. You know, it's this reactive carbon, and when we start down here, especially in this period, this time, this is what we call the transitional period. Well, that's, you kind of got a little bit of the worst of both worlds. Because the soil function hasn't improved all that much yet, and you still got to produce a crop. But as time goes on, the aggregation, infiltration, the soil carbon, water and nutrient holding capacity, everything improves. Your soils, I don't know. In most of our Midwest soils, depending on where they're at, to actually see the difference, to feel the difference, maybe 3 to 5 years. So this is just you know, we have folks who have been in this system for 5 years. We can get a 5-inch rain and have almost no runoff. No runoff. About the only time we have runoff on these fields is we have typically it's a spring rain, the subsoil's still frozen, so we got 0 infiltration. That's the worst case. So it's not, there is no silver bullet, but we can dramatically reduce the runoff. Oh, and if you have low areas in your field, all of a sudden those areas that pond aren't there. Now you still need tile in there. You know, one of the things with the high production prices, we've seen a lot of tile go in. Guys that had 80-foot centers came back and split the middles on 40. We had guys who had ponded areas, went out there and put tile. There was tile there. Did they need more tile? Maybe. But I've been out there and we dug down. The water's standing. There's a tile down here completely dry. Because again, it's a wet area. You do the tillage, you create that compacted layer, water couldn't get down through it. So you gotta, you know, figure out what is actually going on, not just the symptoms before you whatever action you're gonna take. This is, I wish I could demonstrate it here. This is what we call the slake test. Anybody seen the slake test? Okay, a bunch back here have. Pretty simple. Ideally, you got the same soil type. Look at two different management systems. One maybe with the continuous no-till cover crops, one with conventional tillage. You get a clod out of the surface. Air dry it. If you're impatient like me, you put it in the microwave. I don't do that at home anymore, though. Just got to air dry it. Then this is just some hardware cloth, and you can time how long does it take for that clod to break down. What is happening is the water is rushing in to fill those pores. If there's very little glomalin, or if your mycorrhizae fungi population is very low, then that water pressure causes it to explode. If you have that good aggregate stability, that glue holding the soil particles apart, like under a no-till with cover crop system, it will stay together. It will vary, but this is just beginning to break up, and it can vary from anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes, and it will be completely gone. It's all dissolved. The healthy soils, oh, I've had them in my office for over a week, and then I threw it out just because the algae was starting to grow. Now, one important aspect, I had some folks in a neighboring state try this, and I don't know if I forgot or they weren't listening, but you need to use distilled water, which is like rainwater. The minerals in tap water, you may have a lot of calcium or iron, and that can change how things operate. Infiltration, very simple test. You pre-wet it, then you pour a certain amount of water in. So in the conventional tillage, we had 1/10 of an inch per minute. The healthy soils, we had 5 inches per minute. And you can actually measure the water stable aggregates. It's some of the, like the Cornell soil health test does that. So and you need to be careful though, you don't want to cheat and put it over a nightcrawler midden. Or if you put it in a wheel track in a continuous no-till field will give you very similar results as conventional tillage. Compaction issues. Well, you need a ripper, right? Especially if you've got that tillage gene. Well, at least on our soils, it helps in the fall if it's dry when they run it. But it almost always runs back together in the spring. So very short term. Now, however, to pull that ripper, if you're pulling at 12, they're going to say 15 inches deep. And you can justify that big 4-wheel drive tractor and drive around the community and, be king for a little while. Well, what we found is we can actually do a better job of taking care of compaction with cover crops. One year may not take care of it, but we can, 2 or 3 years, we can take care of the compaction. Cold soils. Anybody have issue with cold soils, especially when no-tilling corn? Yeah, very common. Many times this can be, and there's, but if we have surface compaction, that compacted soil, it holds the moisture. It doesn't allow it to evaporate. And there's a direct relationship with the moisture level and the temperature. Okay? So with a healthier soil, we can get better pore space. This allows air in, water can get away. The black residue absorbs heat. Thick residue at the surface, actually if you have the biological system running, I've seen it on occasion where we had like a frost or just a light snow, that there was enough heat given off by the biological system that it melted it, the frost or the snow. Okay? Now, easier said than done. I'm a straight shooter. I like to talk about problems also. Last year, we were like you. We had a very wet spring. And we had some guys that had cover crops out there. So when the cereal rye, it got away from them. It got tall. Well, they finally were able to get in there and burn it down. Well, they had a mat like that. And that ground did not dry out. The alternative, and this is, again, more experienced guys, actually planted into it green and then burn it down. Got a very good corn crop. Is nitrogen a concern up here? I see some heads shaking yes. We're kind of waiting for the hammer to drop on us. A hypoxia zone in the Gulf of Mexico. They're blaming ag. Ag is not totally, but we've got more than our share of responsibility for the amount of nitrogen leaving our fields. Because we have a leaky system. And all we can do is try to turn it down a little bit. Because actually only about 40 to 60% of the nitrogen goes off the field in grain. Doesn't mean we lost the rest of it. Some of it's in the soil, but some of it may, either through denitrification or leaching, may have lost some of that. So how can we improve the efficiency? Well, we know that corn takes up most of the nitrogen, around tassel time. But when it's a young seedling, we don't want it to be short. And this is where cover crops can come in, because they can tie up some of the nitrogen early on. So you have to compensate with, most of our guys are using around 40 pounds with the planter. But this is just showing how applying it, the bulk of it, most of our guys are spoon feeding. We put someone with the planter, someone with the herbicides, and then side dressing, the balance. With the cover crop, we can, and we'll go through this a little bit, but you really have to pay attention to the cover crop and the growth. And it's, with experience, you can kind of get closer to how much is actually going to be available to the corn crop. If you let the cereal rye get tall, none of it's going to be available. The improved efficiency with the manure. So again, if we have some folks in northern part of Indiana that have wheat just so they have some places to get rid of the manure in the summertime. That field usually is laying fallow. The end of the summer, the fall, the spring, hard to say how much was lost. So again, we can improve our nitrogen efficiency, both from scavenging nitrogen, from fixing nitrogen, and holding it in the soil profile. One of the things that that's been lost on us is why do we have the percent organic matter that we have? What's a typical, 4%? Okay, so that must have been under grassland? No, the native vegetation. Okay, so you can see that like our prairie 15,000 to 30,000 pounds of roots per acre. You can go down the list and see those, but you also see soybeans are 500 to 1,000 pounds. Work done at the soil tilth lab showed that we have to have the residue there to stop the erosion, but most of the carbon is actually coming from the root system. And that's why soybeans actually are at net deficit as far as carbon. Corn bean rotation, you're getting all the carbon from the corn roots. But adding cover crops, we can introduce a lot more roots to that system. Those roots decay, that turns into organic matter. And that organic matter has nutrients. 1,000 pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. All of our guys are adding sulfur because we've cleaned up the power plants, with their scrubbers. So sulfur is definitely needed. Again, this is from Dan DeSutter, and it's his concept, and I have to agree with him. You're out here raising crops, basically taking the sunlight and turning it into something with carbon in it. Well, let's capture as much of that sunlight as possible. So in 20 years, his organic matter has gone from 2% to 4%, roughly. And his calculations is, he's calculating 60 pounds of N now in part of his nitrogen budget. It's around $40 an acre. Whoa. That'll help there. Thank you. Anyway, when he started, it was basically almost as light as that subsoil. So again, when we put fertilizer on, actually it's the microbes that are taking it up. And then when they die, they give that off. We don't know how this system operates. Of course, we don't know how the microbes operate in their body very well. But they are 1,000 to 2,000 more times likely if they're next to the roots. So having that living root, we're going to increase that population. Okay, one of the things again, just observation from last night, carbon-nitrogen ratios. You really need to understand your cover crop, the growth stages, and what crop you're planting into. Young cereal rye, 14 to 1. We kind of shoot for 25 to 1. Means we're not going to have, that nitrogen is going to be available in that growing season. Above 25 to 1 is a good chance it's going to become available after the corn crop needs it. So you can see on cereal rye, if it gets waist high or so, it's 36 to 1. You're definitely at a nitrogen deficit. You're going to pay what's called the carbon penalty unless you compensate for it. The clovers are all very low. And your ryegrass, 17 to 1. That nitrogen starts becoming available about 8 weeks after corn planting. It's not uncommon that we see the corn it's so green it's almost black. And it's got to be that nitrogen that it took up. Corn stalks are a lot of our guys that struggle. Corn on corn is simply because the carbon-nitrogen ratio is tied up. Go through these real quick. The recycling of nutrients. So we can bring nutrients up through the biological. We're making phosphorus that normally is not available and making it available. Weed suppression. A lot of benefits. Again, no free lunch. There's also issues. It can deplete soil moisture. We had some farmers that wanted to maximize their nitrogen from crimson clover in 2012. So they let it grow. Well, we had a very dry spring then, and it sucked all the moisture out of the top 6 inches. Didn't get a real good stand of corn. So it can tie the nitrogen up like I described with the cereal rye getting really tall. Or the annual ryegrass. We had one producer who thought he could get away from, speed up planting by eliminating the starter. Well, it was a wet spring. The annual rye got a little taller, about 14, 15 inches. His young corn plants were short of nitrogen. Wasn't available. We got very few doing tillage after it. Vole damage, you have voles up here? Little critters that run just underneath the residue, okay? It can become a weed the following year. In fact, if you're using the cover crops, expect to see some volunteer cover crops the following year. Radishes, ryegrass, whatever. It's going to happen. And it's not, all the seed didn't germinate. And some of it will. It's not a problem, but just you have to deal with it. You need to watch. You can increase the plant disease. You can increase it or you can decrease it, depending on the combination that you're using. Okay. You hear a lot in the magazines, and in fact, I left it on the table. Anyway, there's a brochure back there I picked up, Cover Crop Solutions. Steve Groff is the owner. Steve's a good friend of mine, but it puts in there, how many bushels you're going to gain in corn, soybeans, or wheat. And they claim that it's the only research that is showing this. Well, it fudged things just a little bit. I mean, from those plots, yes, that's what they got. But there can be cases where management isn't there, and a simple thing like they planted the radishes too late. They didn't see it. The farmer's not going to see the yield increase. So, how much nitrogen on the nitrogen scavengers? Annual ryegrass, cereal rye, cover crop radish. Those are scavengers. They don't make nitrogen. It has to be in the soil profile. I have seen all of these be kind of yellow in the fall because they needed nitrogen. So you got to look back at the history of your field. Has manure been put on in the last 2-3 years? Were growing conditions such that there was more residual nitrogen? If it was top yields, you didn't over apply in, there may not be much left. It just depends. And this is, I call it working with cover crops, bringing the art, if you will, back into farming. You have to remain flexible. So the cover crop radish, 70 to 200 pounds an in. Crimson clover, 80 to 130 pounds. Well, I can also show you where all of these, it can range from 12 pounds to 200, just depending on the circumstances. And then you have to estimate how much of that is actually going to be available. This is one study, for example, the radishes. After manure, 225 pounds between the tops and the tubers. Planted with oats, 82 and 86, 168 total. I guess they put on more than 2,000 pounds of manure. Not sure, but, or 2,000 gallons. The other aspect is strongly encourage folks not to plant radishes by themselves. Because they're going to winter kill, and there will be nothing left on that field. The soil will be nice and friable, but you get a rainstorm, I've seen it actually wash because there's nothing there. Adding some oats, they still will winter kill, but you'll have a skeleton left at least, and I think you still got some of the roots from the oat kind of hold the soil in place. This is one of the things, and it's hard to do, but cover crops you have to plan ahead. You need to look at where are you going to be in that field 3 years from now and work backwards. You need to be strategic about what cover crops you're going to use. So identify the cash crop and the cover crop, and what are your agronomic goals. And treat all of these with the same level of management that you do your row crops. This is the bottom line. I mean, we've seen farmers next to each other, one being hugely successful, and the other guy just, he took a yield hit and just, you know, attention to details and timing, the management. What I encourage guys to do, in fact, once you've selected your cover crop, you mark on a calendar when it needs to be planted. And you figure out, okay, is it possible to get it planted then? And if not, you better be switching to a different cover crop, or perhaps even skipping it. Because timing and details are absolutely critical. There's a Midwest cover crop decision tool. Ontario is included in this. It just shows you some of the limitations. When you put in when corn harvest is expected, there's usually not many options left, depending on how late in the season it is. So, big difference, and you gotta accept this and work with it. The date you plant the cover crop, is it dry or do you have soil moisture? What's the temperature going to be like for the next 8 weeks? How much residual nitrogen is in the soil? And kind of reflecting back to temperature, but the number of growing degree days. We really need to develop that for our cover crops. Probably using 40 degrees is when most growth stops. I see cover crops way too often being planted too late with disappointing results. Or the weather can throw you a curve. I understand it was kind of dry here this past fall. Okay, depends on where you're at. But if you're broadcasting cover crop seed and it's dry, that's usually not a good combination. I'm just going to buzz through some of these. So again, looking for opportunities. Where you guys have been doing wheat and red clover is a very big opportunity where you could, instead of doing the red clover, going in with a cocktail mix. After seed corn or silage corn, anytime you're going to have an opportunity. But that said, you also got to figure out how you're going to do the labor, because that's going to be a busy time. So, real quick, I'll run through some different options here. These are kind of the traditional. You know, the drill is fine starting out, but we've got guys doing 4,000, 6,000 acres. They're not going to run a little drill out there. No way. Precision planting. Basically, they put a sugar beet plate in the planter, and you can like plant the radishes in every 30 inches. You can also cut your seeding rate of your radishes down to 2 pounds per acre. And then Austrian winter peas or oats or cereal rye in the other ones. We've got guys that taken their air seeder and added another box to it. So they can, like, they'd plant radishes every 30 inches, and then they'll have 3 rows of usually some type of cereal rye or something like that. So this is what you end up with. So then the radishes winter kill, you've got a zone that's it's got high fertility from the radish. You can go right back in and plant right into it, especially if you've got the auto steer with the RTK and stuff. It's a good way. So this is what we call the bio strip till. This is on the left there, actually going in with putting a little P&K down, taking out, in this case it's annual ryegrass and radish. And that's what it looks like. That's probably grown a little more than most of our guys do it. Add an air seeder on a vertical tillage tool. You drive fast, cover a lot of acres. Provides some soil coverage, but it still doesn't give you the good seed to soil contact. We've tried running a cultipacker behind it, but at least the bearings didn't last very long. So we're getting quite a movement with high clearance seeder. This is a Miller Nitro sprayer. He bought an extra boom. In about 4 to 6 hours, depending if I talk to the son or the father, they can make it into a high clearance cover crop seeder. So basically he uses this for his herbicides, his fungicides. As soon as he's done with fungicides, then he starts seeding cover crops. Actually, Hagee is coming out. That's going to be an option this year, as I understand. So he's actually starting a business now. He had one of his sons come back to the farm, and they're advertising that they'll make it for you. Mixed opinion, some growers you talk to, because this has got a 6-foot clearance. So obviously the corn is leaning back, but it just comes back. But some growers, no. Especially if they're used to flying on fungicides, they don't want something like that out there in their field at that time of the year. They're afraid of eardrop or whatever. Different strokes for different folks. Aerial seeding, north of Indianapolis, this is probably the preferred method. Farmers like it. All they got to do is give a digital map of where the fields are, what they want put on for the cover crop, and we've got a seed dealer that works with the pilots. Is aerial application, is that done much up here? Okay. Obviously, bigger fields, square fields, you got to be aware of things like seed drift. Most of our guys, either if they get very much onto the neighbor, either they'll offer to clean it up for them or send them a bill. So, but all they have to do is write the check. One of the things, and this is for broadcast or aerial seeding, and we don't have actual research on this, but as we increase the organic matter in the top, it seems like we're getting a good stand even under sometimes marginal conditions as far as dryness. And it kind of makes sense. Obviously, there's still limits to that. But this is what this case, it's annual ryegrass. So you got it 4 to 5 inches tall before the combine ever comes in to take the corn out. And then that's the end result, 25 pounds per acre. Annual ryegrass behind wheat, we have to caution our guys not to get in too big a hurry, because our wheat usually comes off in early July, and things like annual ryegrass, radishes, if we plant them in mid-July, there's a good chance that they'll go to seed. Whereas if we wait, plant it, I'd say, I try to get folks to wait until the second week of August for our area. And that's the thing. when a person's talking about cover crops and the timing, your soils, your climate, it's got to be tweaked for yours. Southern part of the state, I just brought this for novelty. I don't think it's got any application, but added a Gandy box to the combine. So he's seeding cover crop, in this case annual ryegrass, while he's combining corn. So again, the timing has to work out. That it only works in Indiana and the southern part of the state. So, been to Quebec a couple of times this year. Working with the agronomist over there a little bit. Actually, I'm more just observing. I don't speak very good French. Okay. But what they're doing is seeding annual ryegrass, and I think they tried some annual ryegrass and crimson clover. They're using Integrity, a BASF product that's got a short residual for both grass and broadleaves. Because that was my first, I got familiar with him, what he was doing, and I was like, your residual herbicides are gonna cause you to lose, your cover crop's gonna be a failure. Well, after 4 years, I guess I finally, okay, it's got some potential. So this is what, and again, there's different methods, but this is the rig that they like. Just broadcast the seed, again, around that V5 stage. And this is a picture of it it was seeded June 21st this year, or this was last year, I guess. And that photo was taken on September 5th. Not much difference between that and what was done with the airplane. So, and again, the process that it does, it needs enough sunlight to germinate and get some size to it. But then the corn shades over, and basically, I don't want to say it goes dormant, because it goes dormant in the wintertime. But it goes to sleep. So it's still, I consider, experimental. We're going to put some plots out this year and see how we get along. In the past, they follow soybeans with it, and we're seeing a 5 to 7 bushel yield bump on the soybeans. On corn, it was kind of no difference up until this year, and they did see a slight yield bump on the corn. Their big concern is their soils is fairly high clay content and compaction. So again, it seems to be working in Quebec. Whether it work in Ontario, I don't know. So we've seen this. I'm just going to buzz through these. But planting a radish too late. This is Dave Brandt from Ohio. Do you guys have guys bring in radish tubers and, to brag at the coffee shop who's got the biggest one? Do you guys do that? Okay, here's got one. So, I mean, the way Dave does it, he precision plants these after wheat, after about 6,000 gallons of hog manure. That is the recipe to grow those. However, other than bragging rights, I don't think it's really what you want. For one, anybody notice a little odor after the radish's winter kill? Yeah, we've had fire departments called, we've had police called. I think there's a dead body in this field. So, anyway, there is a little odor, and it will be nothing left at all come spring. This is an example. Again, we saw those claims, those great numbers of amount of nitrogen scavenged. Well, they did everything right. The nitrogen was there with the manure. It was planted timely. This is what happens when you plant them too late. And we didn't sample this, but I dare suspect that there's 250 pounds of nitrogen in that. Okay. The other thing to notice is, see that it went down about inch and a half went sideways. Again, if you've got compaction and it's dry, it's going to look for a crack. It will move over to the side and down. So, I think for compaction, actually the cereals, annual ryegrass, cereal rye, the fibrous root system actually do more, or plant them in combination. Just the winter kill. But this is, again, it'd be the ready to come in and do the bio planting of the corn, and this soil here has gone from like a 1% to almost 5%. But that's because he's worked at it very hard. One of the new things, cereal rye, you want to get tall, you can run a roller crimper. Basically, you still might need to clean it up a little bit, but does a pretty good job. Roots don't go quite as deep as with annual ryegrass. This is one of the things that some of our growers have, but we know that cereal rye can get away from you. So our rule of thumb is if you're planting corn into cereal rye, and especially if you're new to the game, about 14 inches. It's as tall as you want the cereal rye to get. So you know you're not tying up a lot of nitrogen. I got a farmer in Iowa that I work with. He's done this for 12 years. He has a wet spring. You know, the big sprayers now, you can't get out there. He has the ATV sprayer. And besides that, if you wanted an ATV but had trouble persuading the wife, then you got a good excuse. But this is 60-foot booms, and it's got all the GPS and all the bells and whistles. So, annual ryegrass snow cover is important because it will winter kill. Minus 30, minus 40 wind chill. There's some issues with cold weather. And I did talk to one gentleman and said, you guys were having trouble with lamb's quarter. You know, Roundup has never been really great with lamb's quarter. And one of the things that we found out with the annual ryegrass is we stop, if it's on the chilly side, we stop spraying around 3 p.m. We try to give 4 hours, 5 hours of sunlight, and it makes a difference. So, I think we're about done. I'm just going to buzz through. Crimson clover looks pretty. This is planting green. This is what I call for the guys who have got more experience. If you want to plant into a green cover crop, plants so much easier. So much easier. But obviously there's risk associated with doing that. And again, most of the legumes, and this is the problem like with crimson clover, we're real excited about it, but it maximizes nitrogen fixation when it's just getting ready to bloom. Well, it's about 3 weeks, 4 weeks later than we want to plant corn. So we've got a lot of guys terminating it before, you know, its potential 130 pounds, they're getting maybe 30. So it's that compromise with planting date. This is just a little bit because you got opportunity after wheat. This is some of Dave Brandt's, what he does, the cocktail mix. I don't know if the summer cover crops, which are a totally different list, it's things like cowpea, sunflower, whether they would work up here or not. But we've got 3 guys that are put wheat in the rotation. They're trying this because they want to see if 100 bushel wheat and this, they can reduce their nitrogen and make the 3-year rotation economically viable. And the livestock, huge opportunity here. This is on very good ground. Oats and peas planted in the spring. If you got cattle, this is a great way to get what some would call free forage. So again, it's the organic matter and the microbes that influence this nutrient recycling, soil compaction, living roots.